Thoth once said, "The soul cannot rise while chained to illusions." And if you look closely, that single sentence holds the entire blueprint of awakening. For most of our lives, we live bound by invisible chains, expectations, fears, social roles, and desires we never truly chose. We move through life half asleep, chasing things we're told will make us happy, never realizing that the very chase keeps us enslaved. But something strange begins to happen when the spirit stirs. A quiet unease takes root within you. You start noticing how loud the world is, how much of what you do, say, and even believe doesn't come from your soul, but from conditioning. You begin to sense the artificiality in conversations, the emptiness behind endless scrolling, the performative smiles of people lost in the same cycle. This is the first spark of awakening, when the illusion begins to crack. But awakening is not a thunderstorm that strikes overnight. It is more like a candle in a dark room, flickering, growing brighter each time you choose truth over comfort. You start to rebel, but not outwardly. It's a silent rebellion. You stop participating in the noise. You stop feeding the distractions. You start detaching from what doesn't nourish your spirit. Thoth wisdom reminds us that awakening isn't about learning new things. It's about unlearning everything false. It's peeling away layers of identity until only the essence remains. So, when a soul begins to awaken, it doesn't quit the world. It simply stops being hypnotized by it. It no longer dances to the rhythm of chaos, but moves to the silent beat of inner truth. And this transformation doesn't happen all at once. It happens slowly, quietly, almost imperceptibly. You begin to release the need to prove yourself, the desire for endless stimulation, the attachment to control, to things, to validation. One by one, the chains fall away. Because spiritually awake people don't abandon the world, they transcend it. They live in the world, but not of it. Their light grows quietly, until their very presence feels different, calm, detached, unbothered, but deeply alive. And so, Thoth words echo across time. The soul cannot rise while chained to illusions. Here are the illusions, the habits, attachments, and fears that spiritually awake people quit, slowly, but surely. 1. The need to be understood. When your soul begins to awaken, one of the first illusions you'll struggle with is the need to be understood. It's such a subtle desire, yet so deeply ingrained in the human heart. You want people to see what you see. You want them to feel what you've discovered. You want them to understand why you've changed. At first, you'll try to explain your awakening, how your priorities have shifted, how you no longer resonate with meaningless conversations, how your energy now craves silence over noise. You'll speak of consciousness, alignment, truth, and inner peace. But soon, you'll realize that your words fall flat. People look at you strangely, as if you've become distant or too deep. Some may even mock the changes you've made, saying you've grown cold or detached. This hurts, because part of awakening is the death of who you once were, and that death is invisible to everyone but you. Thoth once said, "The awakened must not seek the approval of the sleeping." That line alone carries centuries of wisdom. When your soul begins to rise, your vibration shifts beyond the frequency of superficial understanding. Most people are not ready to perceive beyond what their 5 senses tell them. You'll find yourself in a strange in-between, too awake to fit into the old world, yet still too human to fully detach from it. You'll want to explain your new silence, your detachment, your rejection of shallow living. But soon you'll understand, truth doesn't need to be defended. It doesn't need to be explained to those who haven't yet seen it. The need to be understood comes from the ego. It's the ego that says, "I need others to validate that I'm right." But the soul whispers, "I know what I know." When you reach that point, something inside you softens. You stop needing people to get you, and instead, you find comfort in being misunderstood. Because misunderstanding is a sign that you've outgrown the ordinary. You start to see that the people who judge you for your silence, your distance, or your peace are simply seeing from their own level of awareness. You no longer take it personally. You see the world as Thoth saw it, a vast classroom where each soul is learning at its own pace. And so, you stop trying to drag others into your frequency. You realize that awakening cannot be taught, it can only be experienced. You can point toward the door, but they must walk through it themselves. This surrender is liberating. You begin to conserve your energy. You no longer argue. You no longer defend. You simply be. Your peace becomes your statement. your calmness becomes your explanation. Thoth's teachings remind us that when you stop seeking understanding from others, you open the doorway to understanding yourself. You stop searching for mirrors outside you and start reflecting inward. You notice that you were never misunderstood, you were simply misplaced. You were trying to find belonging in a world built on illusions. As you rise, you realize that not everyone will join you, and that's okay. Some souls are not meant to understand you, they're meant to remind you of how far you've come. So you learn to walk quietly, carrying your truth like a sacred flame, not to light others who refuse to see, but to guide those who are searching for the same light. And over time, the loneliness fades. You begin to attract new souls, people who speak your language without words, who feel your energy without explanation, who understand your silence more deeply than others ever understood your speech. That is when you finally understand the hidden truth. Thoth spoke of wisdom does not shout, it resonates. The need to be understood dissolves, replaced by an inner knowing that truth is not something you share, it's something you embody. You live it, you breathe it, you radiate it quietly, and those who are meant to understand you will simply feel it, because the awakened do not need to be seen, their very presence is enough. 2. The habit of overreacting. One of the clearest signs of spiritual awakening is when you begin to notice how often you used to react to everything. Someone insults you, and your energy spikes. A plan fails, and your whole mood collapses. The smallest inconvenience once had the power to control your entire emotional state. Before awakening, this is normal, because the ego rules the mind, and the ego needs reaction. It feeds on drama, conflict, and emotional noise. It wants to feel important, even if it's through pain. But when your spirit begins to awaken, something subtle changes. You start observing yourself in those moments. You catch the spark before it becomes a fire. You notice the space between what happens and how you respond. And in that tiny space, that moment of awareness, you begin to reclaim your power. Thoth once said, "He who governs his reaction, governs his reality." You begin to understand what that means. You realize that the world isn't happening to you, it's happening for you, showing you what still controls you. Every emotional trigger becomes a mirror reflecting where you're still not free. It's not that life suddenly becomes peaceful. No, it's that your relationship to chaos transforms. The same people still test you, the same situations still unfold, but your energy no longer collapses under their weight. You start to respond instead of react. You pause, you breathe, you observe the storm without stepping into it. At first, this feels unnatural, even uncomfortable, because the ego wants to fight back, to defend, to control. But the soul whispers, "Be still." This stillness is not weakness, it's mastery. When you stop reacting to every disturbance, the world loses its power over you. People will still try to provoke you, but your silence will confuse them. They'll wonder why you don't take the bait. They'll sense your calm and feel both threatened and intrigued by it. Because calmness is power, and few possess it. The awakened understand that overreaction is a symptom of unhealed emotion. Every time you explode in anger, it's not because of the situation, it's because something deep inside you hasn't been healed yet. The world simply presses the bruise. Thoth taught that the wise do not seek to control the external world, but to master the inner one. You begin to see your emotions as teachers, not enemies. Anger teaches you where your boundaries are weak. Jealousy shows you where you feel inadequate. Fear reveals where you do not trust the divine order. So instead of reacting, you begin to listen. You start using your triggers as tools for growth. And slowly, the external world loses its ability to shake you. You become like a calm ocean, deep, still, unbothered by surface waves. The storms come, but you no longer identify with them. You watch them pass, knowing that no storm lasts forever. As your awareness deepens, you realize something profound. Reaction is energy wasted. It drains your focus, your creativity, and your peace. And for what? To prove a point that doesn't even matter. To defend an ego that doesn't even exist. So, you start choosing peace over being right. You start valuing silence over argument. You start walking away, not because you're weak, but because your energy is too sacred to be thrown into chaos. Thoth once said, "The sun does not answer the barking of dogs, it simply continues to shine." and that becomes your way of life. You let people say what they want, you let life unfold as it must. You no longer react to noise, you outgrow it. And when that shift happens, something miraculous unfolds. The same world that once drained you, now feels light. The same people who once irritated you now teach you patience. The same pain that once broke you now becomes your wisdom. That's the beauty of awakening. It doesn't remove the chaos, it transforms your response to it. Because in the eyes of the awakened, nothing is personal anymore. Everything is a lesson, everything is sacred, everything is part of your becoming. And so you stop reacting, not because you no longer care, but because you finally learned to care correctly. You no longer protect your ego, you protect your peace. And in that sacred stillness, the universe finally reveals its true face, not as an enemy to fight, but as a mirror helping you rise. 3. The addiction to noise and distraction. In the ancient writings, Thoth warned, the loudest world hides the quietest truth. And that perhaps is the most difficult illusion for a modern soul to break, the addiction to noise and distraction. From the moment you wake up, the world invades your mind. The buzzing of your phone, the endless scroll of news, messages, videos, every second is a competition for your attention. And before you even breathe consciously, your spirit is already scattered into 1,000 fragments. This is not by accident. The world thrives on your distraction because a distracted mind is a powerless mind. When your attention is hijacked, your consciousness is no longer your own. You start living reactively, responding to everything around you, but rarely being. And yet, when your spirit begins to awaken, you start to notice something subtle, but deeply unsettling. The constant noise begins to hurt. It's not just external sound, it's mental clutter, emotional static, energetic chaos. The endless stimulation that once entertained you now feels suffocating. You try to watch the same shows, scroll the same feeds, engage in the same meaningless conversations, but something in you resists. You feel an emptiness beneath the noise, a quiet voice whispering, "This isn't feeding your soul anymore." At first, you might feel guilty for withdrawing. You'll tell yourself you're being distant or antisocial, but you're not withdrawing from people, you're withdrawing from illusion. You're remembering what peace actually feels like. Thoth taught that silence is not the absence of sound, but the presence of truth. And when your spirit begins to crave silence, it's a sign that you're starting to return home, to your original frequency. You begin to choose stillness over stimulation. You'd rather sit quietly under the sky than drown in endless chatter. You'd rather feel your breath than chase the next dopamine hit. You'd rather read one sacred page than consume 1,000 empty opinions. Slowly, the distractions that once defined your life begin to lose their flavor. Music sounds different. Entertainment feels hollow. You stop chasing the next thrill because you realize that peace, not pleasure, is the ultimate high. This withdrawal is uncomfortable. Your ego will resist. It will crave the noise it once fed on. But if you remain still long enough, you'll start to notice something extraordinary. The silence isn't empty. It's full of insight, full of guidance, full of divine whispers that you were too distracted to hear before. You begin to hear your own thoughts clearly for the first time. You begin to feel your intuition, not as a mystical concept, but as a living presence within you. You begin to understand that the universe has always been speaking. You just couldn't hear it over the noise. Thoth once said, "The gods speak in stillness. The unready call it silence." That line holds the essence of awakening. It's not that divine truth suddenly appears. It's that the noise dissolves enough for you to perceive it. So you start protecting your peace with sacred discipline. You spend less time explaining yourself and more time listening within. You stop seeking constant stimulation because you've realized that the true joy of existence is not found in more, but in less. The irony is that the more you detach from distraction, the more alive you feel. Colors become deeper, sounds more vivid, presence more profound. The small things you once ignored, the rustling of leaves, the sound of your own breath, the rhythm of rain, become sacred. And that's when you truly understand what Thoth meant when he said, "Within the quiet mind, the divine speaks in thunder." It's not that awakening demands isolation, it demands awareness. You can still live in the world, but now, the world no longer drowns you. You realize that silence is not loneliness, it's connection. It connects you back to the source, to your essence, to the timeless consciousness that existed before the noise began. The addiction fades, the phone stays untouched, the noise outside continues, but your inner world remains still, like a mountain unmoved by the wind. That is the state of true spiritual maturity, when you no longer need the world to distract you, because your own presence has become enough. And from that stillness, everything begins to align, effortlessly, gracefully, divinely, because once you master silence, the universe starts to speak through you. 4. The need to control life. Thoth once said, "He who grasps the river cannot guide its flow." And that is the quiet tragedy of human life. Our endless attempt to control what was never meant to be controlled. From the moment we are born, the world teaches us to hold on. We plan our futures, define our worth through achievements, and measure peace by how well things align with our expectations. We chase certainty as if it were oxygen. We convince ourselves that if we just plan hard enough, work hard enough, and think long enough, life will obey us. But the more we try to control everything, the more we suffer. Control is the ego's favorite illusion. It gives us a false sense of safety, a belief that if we can manage every outcome, we can avoid pain. But awakening reveals the opposite truth. The tighter you grip life, the faster it slips through your hands. When your spirit begins to awaken, you start to feel how heavy control truly is. You notice how exhausting it is to micromanage the future, to worry about what others think, to obsess over every little detail. You begin to see that control is rooted not in power, but in fear. Fear that things won't go your way. Fear that you'll be hurt again. Fear that without structure, you'll fall apart. But here's what Thoth understood. Life's flow cannot be bent by human will. It is ancient, intelligent, and divinely ordered. When you awaken, you realize that what you once called chaos is actually harmony too vast for your mind to comprehend. You begin to notice how every setback carried wisdom. Every detour protected you from something unseen. Every delay was not punishment, it was preparation. At first, letting go feels like dying. Because the ego panics when it loses control, it believes surrender means weakness. But the awakened soul knows, surrender is power in its purest form. When you stop forcing, things start aligning. When you stop chasing, what's meant for you finds its way. When you stop controlling, you make room for divine timing to unfold. Thoth said, "Those who flow with time walk with the gods," and that is the essence of spiritual maturity, learning to trust the unseen rhythm guiding your life. It doesn't mean you stop caring or planning. It means you do what you can, with clarity and presence, and release attachment to the outcome. You start to understand that your role is not to control the story, but to honor the script. When things fall apart, you don't curse fate anymore. You pause, breathe, and whisper, "There's something here I can't see yet." That moment, that space between reaction and surrender, is where awakening deepens. Because surrender is not giving up, it's giving in to the greater intelligence that governs all things. It's the trust that everything is unfolding exactly as it should, even if you don't yet understand how. You start to live lighter. You stop trying to force people to change. You stop chasing relationships that don't align. You stop trying to make life fit your plan, and instead, you let your plan fit life. This doesn't make you passive, it makes you peaceful. You still move, create, and act, but your actions now come from alignment, not anxiety. You no longer move from desperation, you move from faith. Thoth's wisdom teaches that control is the language of fear, trust is the language of creation. When you trust the divine order, life begins to cooperate with you in ways logic could never explain. Synchronicities appear, right people cross your path, opportunities unfold naturally, and in those moments, you realize, life was never against you, it was simply waiting for you to stop resisting. When you stop controlling, you start flowing, and when you flow, you enter a state of effortless alignment, where your energy, purpose, and reality begin to move as one. The awakened don't force outcomes, they attune themselves to the current of divine rhythm. They know that storms will come, but they no longer fear them. They ride the waves with grace, knowing that even the rough waters lead them closer to the shore of their destiny. Thoth once said, The one who trusts the current becomes the current. That is the highest state of awakening, when your will and the universe's will become indistinguishable, when you no longer need to control life, because you have become one with its flow. And in that sacred flow, everything you once chased comes to you, not as a reward, but as a reflection of your peace. So let go of the need to control, release your grip on what should happen, because in surrendering, you don't lose power, you become power. The river was never meant to be controlled, it was meant to be trusted. 5. The fear of losing people. Thoth once wrote, "That which is yours by divine harmony will never be lost, and that which leaves was never in tune with your soul." When you awaken spiritually, you begin to see relationships differently. You stop chasing people. You stop begging to be understood or loved. You stop fearing that someone leaving your life means failure or loneliness. Instead, you begin to recognize that loss is simply life's way of realigning your path. Spiritually asleep people cling to relationships, even toxic ones, because they equate presence with value. If they're here, I must be worthy. If they leave, I must have failed. That's the illusion. But those who awaken understand that not every bond is meant to last forever. Some souls only walk beside you to teach, not to stay. At first, this realization hurts. The mind fights back, it tries to hold on, to fix, to explain. But slowly, through moments of silence and pain, the awakened person realizes letting go doesn't mean losing love, it means respecting flow. You see, when you fear losing people, you become a prisoner of attachment. You compromise your authenticity just to keep others comfortable. You silence your truth to avoid confrontation. You pretend to be smaller so no one leaves. But in doing so, you abandon yourself, and no spiritual growth can happen in that state. Spiritually awake souls learn to love without possession. They understand that real love flows, not clings. They can watch someone walk away and still whisper a blessing in their heart, because deep within, they know what's aligned will always return, and what's not will fade, no matter how tightly you grip. When you release the fear of losing people, something magical happens. You attract those who are meant for your higher frequency. The kind of souls who don't need to be convinced to stay, because they're walking the same path of light. And that's the beauty of awakening. You stop trying to keep everyone, and instead, you allow the right ones to find you in peace, not chaos. Thoth would remind us, you do not lose people, you only shed those who no longer match your vibration. It's not loss, it's liberation. Thoth once said, "The awakened soul walks lightly, for it carries no weight of the world." And that's the essence of spiritual awakening. It's not about adding more beliefs, more rituals, or more knowledge. It's about shedding, layer by layer, illusion by illusion. The more you let go, the freer you become. Spiritually awake people don't rise because they've found something new. They rise because they've stopped carrying what was never theirs. The need to be understood, the habit of reacting, the addiction to noise, the urge to control, and the fear of losing people. Each time they release something false, they move closer to truth. A truth that doesn't shout, doesn't demand, doesn't fear, it simply is. But make no mistake, awakening isn't glamorous. It's not a high vibration escape from reality, it's a dismantling. It's uncomfortable, lonely, and raw. You will lose parts of yourself you thought you needed. You'll watch old identities crumble, friendships fade, and paths diverge. Yet through that collapse, something eternal begins to shine through you, something pure, peaceful, and unshakable. And when that happens, you no longer seek validation or control. You no longer fear silence or solitude. You begin to trust life as it unfolds, with all its uncertainty and change. Because a spiritually awake person knows, life doesn't happen to you, it happens through you. Every loss, every delay, every ending, it's all part of your evolution. So, if you find yourself in a season of shedding, remember, this is not your downfall, it's your ascension in disguise. Fourth final whisper would be this: the light of awakening is not something you find, it is what remains when all that is false is gone. Keep walking, slowly, silently. You're not losing your life, you're remembering it.